The Prize, The Epic Quest for Oil, Money, and Power by Daniel Yergin. Hello there, come sit with me for a while. I want to tell you a story that reads like an adventure novel, except every bit of it is true. It's filled with titans who built empires grander than anything Tolkien dreamed up, and ordinary people who stumbled into extraordinary fortunes. It's a tale that will explain more about the last 150 years, the wars, the revolutions, the very roads you drive on, than a dozen history classes combined. This is the story of a substance, a dark, thick liquid that sleeps deep within the earth. Some have called it black gold, others the blood of the earth. A few dramatic souls even dubbed it the devil's tears. We simply call it oil. And its story? It's nothing less than humanity's epic quest for the ultimate prize, the power to shape the destiny of our world. Before we dive in, let me tell you about the book we're exploring. It's called The Prize, written by historian Daniel Yergin. When this book hit the shelves, it didn't just make waves, it created a tsunami. It snagged the Pulitzer Prize, topped bestseller lists worldwide, and got translated into languages from Tokyo to Tel Aviv. It became a television series that captivated over 20 million Americans. Why such a phenomenon? Because Yergin pulled off something remarkable. He took what sounds like the world's most boring topic, the petroleum industry, and revealed it as the greatest thriller ever told. He showed us how a glob of crude bubbling up in a Pennsylvania creek could trigger world wars, mint billionaires overnight, and literally build the suburbs, highways, and skylines that define modern life. Yergin himself isn't an oil man. He's a scholar with a gift for seeing the invisible threads connecting everything. He's advised presidents and world leaders, and he understands something crucial. Oil isn't just what you pump into your car, it's the hidden engine of civilization itself. It's what drove Churchill to make a gamble that changed naval warfare forever. It's what powered Hitler's war machine and what ultimately strangled it. It's what transformed the Middle East from sleepy desert kingdoms into geopolitical powerhouses. So here's my promise to you. By the time we're done here, you'll understand the secret history of the modern world. You'll see the invisible lines connecting gas prices to global conflicts. You'll meet the larger-than-life characters, the risk-taking wildcatters, the ruthless tycoons, the shrewd sheiks, and the calculating statesmen who gambled everything for this prize. This isn't just a summary, it's an invitation to understand the forces that shaped your world and will shape your future. Because make no mistake, the epic quest for oil, money, and power is far from over. You're living in its next chapter right now. So take a deep breath. Let's begin. Our story doesn't start in a boardroom or palace. It begins in the quiet, wooded hills of northwestern Pennsylvania in the 1850s, with a substance people called rock oil. For years, it was just a nuisance, smelly goo that bubbled up in creeks and ruined perfectly good salt wells. People bottled it as medicine, calling it Seneca oil, and hawking it as a cure for everything from headaches to baldness. It was a local curiosity, nothing more. But a few visionaries saw something different. George Bissell, a New York lawyer, looked at a sample of this rock oil and had a flash of insight. He knew it burned. What if, he wondered, this wasn't medicine at all? What if this was the future of light? In the mid-1800s, the world was desperate for light. People were tired of dim, smoky whale oil lamps that cost a fortune. They needed something cheap, reliable, and bright to push back the darkness. Bissell became convinced that rock oil was the answer. He and a small group of investors hired a Yale chemistry professor named Benjamin Silliman Jr. to analyze the stuff. Silliman's report changed everything. He confirmed that rock oil could be refined into high-quality kerosene. With that scientific blessing, the dream had legs. But how to get enough of it? Skimming it off creeks wouldn't build an industry. Then Bissell saw an advertisement showing derricks used for drilling salt wells. The image sparked an idea. Why not drill for oil the same way? The idea got laughed out of boardrooms. Drill for oil like you drill for water? You're insane, one banker reportedly said. But Bissell and his partners persisted. They hired an unlikely hero named Edwin Drake, an unemployed railroad conductor with zero drilling experience. But Drake had two things going for him: a free railroad pass and the stubbornness of a mule. To give him credibility, his employers started addressing his mail to Colonel Drake. The title stuck, even though he'd never served a day in the military. In 1859, near the tiny lumber town of Titusville, Pennsylvania, Colonel Drake began his quest. Locals mocked him relentlessly, calling his venture Drake's Folly. He struggled for months, hemorrhaging money, battling technical disasters, and watching his investors lose faith. Then, on a sweltering August afternoon, his drill bit dropped into a crevice at just 69 feet. The next day, his driller, a blacksmith everyone called Uncle Billy Smith, peered down the pipe and saw dark liquid floating on the water. It was oil. News spread like wildfire. The Yankees struck oil. Farmers rushed into Titusville, transforming the quiet valley almost overnight into a chaotic, muddy boomtown. Derricks sprouted like mushrooms. Land prices went ballistic. A brand new industry was born, filled with wildcatters, speculators, and dreamers chasing instant wealth. People talked about having oil on the brain, a fever that swept the nation. This was America's first great oil boom, a wild time of gushing wells, spectacular waste, and fortunes won and lost in a heartbeat. But one man looked at this chaos and saw opportunity in order. His name was John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller was a young, deeply religious, and methodical bookkeeper from Cleveland, Ohio. He wasn't a wildcatter gambling on wells. He was a refiner who believed in systems. He looked at the oil fields with cold disapproval. He saw waste, chaos, and destructive competition. Where others saw a roll of the dice, he saw a business waiting to be organized, controlled, and dominated. In 1870, he founded Standard Oil. His goal was breathtaking in its audacity: control the entire American oil industry. His strategy was brilliant and ruthless. Rockefeller understood that the real power wasn't in owning wells. It was in controlling how oil got refined and transported. He secretly negotiated deals with powerful railroads, securing not just discounts on his own shipments, but also a cut of what his competitors paid. This practice, called the drawback, was devastating. His rivals were unknowingly financing their own destruction. Rockefeller and his aggressive partner, Henry Flagler, launched their campaign of conquest. They'd approach a competing refiner with a polite offer: sell to us, join us, and prosper. If the refiner refused, Standard Oil would unleash what they called a good sweating, slashing prices in that specific market until the competitor faced bankruptcy. Faced with ruin, most sold out. Within a decade, by 1879, Standard Oil controlled a jaw-dropping 90% of America's refining capacity. It had become the world's first great monopoly, a behemoth the public started calling the octopus. Rockefeller wasn't just building a company, he was creating an entirely new kind of organization. In 1882, he formalized his empire into the Standard Oil Trust, the first of its kind. It was a massive, vertically integrated machine controlling every step from pipelines to delivery wagons. Rockefeller's obsession with efficiency was legendary. He famously bragged about saving a few drops of solder on each kerosene can, a tiny saving that, multiplied by millions, added up to a fortune. He brought cheap, reliable light to the masses, not just in America but worldwide, from European villages to Chinese plains. As he saw it, he was an upbuilder, bringing order and progress. To his crushed competitors and a fearful public, however, he was a ruthless monopolist, a robber baron playing with loaded dice. As the 19th century wound down, two challenges emerged to Rockefeller's dominance. The first came from Russia, in the remote province of Baku on the Caspian Sea, where oil didn't just seep, it erupted in spectacular gushers. The Nobel brothers, siblings of Alfred, who'd later create the Nobel Prize, built a rival empire. Ludwig Nobel, the oil king of Baku, was as visionary as Rockefeller. He introduced the world's first oil tankers, revolutionizing transportation and letting Russian oil challenge Standard's European markets. Soon the powerful Rothschild banking family joined in, financing a railroad from Baku to the Black Sea. A global oil war erupted. The second challenge came from an unexpected place. Marcus Samuel, a London merchant who'd started his career selling decorative seashells, saw a chance to break Standard's grip on Asian markets. His plan was a logistics masterpiece. He cut a secret deal with the Rothschilds for Russian oil, then commissioned a fleet of advanced tankers designed to pass through the newly opened Suez Canal, a route Standard ships couldn't use. In 1892, Samuel's first tanker, the Murex, steamed through Suez carrying cheap Russian kerosene to Singapore and Bangkok. It caught Standard Oil completely off guard. Samuel named his enterprise the Shell Transport and Trading Company, honoring his humble beginnings. But even as these rivalries reshaped the world, a new invention threatened to make kerosene obsolete. Thomas Edison's light bulb was spreading fast. It seemed Rockefeller's empire, built on lighting the world, was doomed. Then fortune smiled again. Just as one door closed, another swung wide open. The age of the horseless carriage was dawning. The internal combustion engine, noisy, smelly, and unreliable at first, ran on what had been a worthless byproduct of kerosene refining, gasoline. Men like Henry Ford were about to turn automobiles from rich men's toys into everyday necessities. The oil industry had found a new market, and this one was far bigger. The age of illumination was giving way to the age of gasoline. The new century brought new titans and new battlegrounds. In 1901, a massive discovery at a place called Spindletop in Texas unleashed a flood of oil and gave birth to future giants, Texaco and Gulf Oil. The discovery was so immense, it changed oil's very nature. Texas crude was heavy, not ideal for kerosene, but perfect as fuel for ships, trains, and factories. The world began switching from coal to oil. Meanwhile, public fury against Standard Oil reached fever pitch, fueled by brilliant investigative journalism from Ida Tarbell. Her father had been one of the small oil men crushed by Rockefeller. Her devastating exposé, The History of the Standard Oil Company, detailed the trust's ruthless tactics and turned public opinion decisively against it. In 1911, the Supreme Court delivered its verdict. Standard Oil was a monopoly and must be broken up. The empire Rockefeller built was shattered into dozens of smaller companies, ancestors of today's Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and others. Rockefeller, by then the world's richest man, retreated into a quiet retirement of philanthropy and golf, but the competitive forces he'd suppressed were now unleashed. As the world drifted toward war, a young, ambitious British politician made a decision that would forever link oil and national destiny. Winston Churchill, then head of the British Navy, faced a momentous choice. Should he convert Britain's mighty fleet from coal, which Britain had in abundance, to oil, which had to be imported from distant places like Persia? The military advantages of oil were undeniable. Oil-powered ships were faster, had longer range, and could refuel at sea, but the risk was enormous. Depending on foreign oil meant placing the British Empire's security in foreign hands. Churchill didn't hesitate. With characteristic boldness, he made the plunge. Mastery itself, he declared, was the prize of the venture. To secure supply, he convinced the British government in 1914 to buy 51% of a struggling Persian venture, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, forerunner of today's BP. For the first time, a government had become the majority owner of an oil company. Churchill's gamble paid off almost immediately. When World War I erupted, it became a new kind of war, mechanized warfare. Oil demand skyrocketed. At the Battle of the Marne, Parisian taxicabs rushed troops to the front, helping save Paris from German advance. Trucks, tanks, and airplanes, all oil-powered, transformed land warfare. At sea, Britain's oil-fired fleet's speed and flexibility gave it decisive advantage over Germany's coal-fired navy. A new theater opened in the air, entirely dependent on gasoline. The war established a profound truth. Access to oil was essential for military victory. As one French senator declared, oil was the blood of victory. After the war, victorious allies scrambled to secure new oil sources, particularly in the shattered Ottoman Empire. The Middle East, once remote and exotic, became a grand prize in the global struggle for oil. A secretive deal called the Red Line Agreement carved up former Ottoman oil prospects among British, French, and American companies. The deal was brokered by a mysterious Armenian financier named Calouste Gulbenkian, who secured a 5% share of all oil produced, earning him the lifelong nickname Mr. 5%. The 1920s became the age of gasoline. In America, automobiles symbolized freedom and prosperity. A new landscape emerged: paved roads, filling stations, motels. But fear of running out drove a frantic worldwide search for new supplies. The industry's great migration moved from Mexico's declining fields to Venezuela's booming ones, ruled by iron-fisted dictator Juan Vicente Gómez, who turned his country into a personal oil hacienda. The greatest discoveries were still to come. In Arabian Peninsula deserts, a few hardy geologists suspected vast oil reservoirs lay hidden beneath the sand. In the 1930s, an American company, Standard Oil of California, gambled on a concession in Saudi Arabia from King Ibn Saud. The king needed money. The annual pilgrimage to Mecca, his main revenue source, had dwindled during the Depression. In 1938, after years of difficult exploration, they struck oil. It was the beginning of discovering the largest petroleum source the world had ever known. Around the same time, a Gulf Oil and Anglo-Persian joint venture found oil in tiny Kuwait. The oil world's center of gravity began its slow, inexorable shift to the Middle East. As the world stumbled toward another conflict, oil was central to Axis powers' calculations. Germany, with almost no domestic oil, desperately depended on imports and an expensive program to create synthetic fuel from coal. Hitler's war machine was designed for blitzkrieg, lightning war to win quick victories before fuel ran out. His 1941 eastward drive into the Soviet Union aimed primarily to capture rich Caucasus oil fields. It was a gamble he'd lose. German armies outran supply lines, bogged down in Russian winter, and were ultimately defeated at Stalingrad, partly due to fuel shortages. In the Pacific, Japan's predicament was worse. Almost entirely dependent on imported oil, much from the United States, Japan saw its Asian empire ambitions strangled by energy insecurity. When the United States imposed an oil embargo in summer 1941, responding to Japanese aggression, Japan's leaders felt cornered. To them, it was life or death. The path to oil-rich Dutch East Indies had to be secured. That meant eliminating one great threat, the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The Pearl Harbor attack was daring and brilliant, but born of desperate oil gambling. Japan's Achilles heel, dependence on long sea lanes for oil, proved fatal. American submarines waged devastating war against Japanese tankers, slowly choking Japan's war machine to death. Allied victory in World War II was a victory of arms, but also of oil. The United States, producing two-thirds of the world's oil, fueled its own military and its allies. As one British official said at war's end, the Allied cause had floated to victory upon a wave of oil. The post-war world was dominated by two superpowers, the United States and Soviet Union, locked in Cold War, and it was a world that would run, more than ever, on oil. Europe and Japan's Great Reconstruction was fueled by cheap, abundant Middle Eastern oil. This began the hydrocarbon age. The world economy boomed. A new consumer society emerged, built around automobiles and suburbs. Oil toppled King Coal from his throne. The post-war petroleum order was dominated by great international oil companies. The Seven Sisters, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Texaco, Gulf, Shell, and BP. They controlled vast Middle East reserves through concessions. But conflict seeds were sprouting. Producing countries, led by Venezuela, demanded greater profit shares. This led to a revolutionary arrangement, the 50-50 principle, splitting profits evenly between company and host country. In 1950, Saudi Arabia and Aramco adopted this principle, and it spread quickly across the Middle East. But 50-50 wasn't enough. Rising nationalism swept the developing world. In 1951 in Iran, charismatic, eccentric, fiercely nationalistic Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh electrified his country by nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. It was the first great challenge to international oil company dominance in the Middle East. Britain was outraged. The world's largest refinery at Abadan shut down. Britain organized a worldwide Iranian oil boycott. The crisis dragged on 2 years, bringing Iran to economic collapse's brink. Finally, in 1953, a CIA and British intelligence coup overthrew Mossadegh and restored the Shah. A new arrangement emerged. Iranian oil was now run by a Western company consortium, with American firms gaining major Iranian stakes for the first time. The old concession was gone, but Western control had been reasserted. The next challenge came from Egypt. In 1956, fiery nationalist leader Gamal Abdel Nasser seized the Suez Canal, the vital artery through which most European oil flowed. Britain and France, old colonial powers, were determined to topple him. In secret pact with Israel, they launched military invasion. But they'd miscalculated. The United States, led by President Eisenhower, was furious. Eisenhower saw the invasion as colonial throwback that would drive Arabs toward the Soviet Union. He used America's immense financial and oil power to force British and French humiliating withdrawal. The Suez Crisis was a watershed, marking the end of Britain and France as great Middle Eastern powers and U.S. ascendancy. It made Nasser a hero throughout the Arab world. The crisis also exposed Europe's vulnerability. Frightened by temporary oil cutoff, Europe began frantic searches for new, secure sources. This led to new exploration waves. In Italy, dynamic state oilman Enrico Mattei challenged Seven Sisters' dominance. He famously called them a war on their privileged position, pioneering new deals offering producing countries 75% profit shares. New discoveries were made in Algeria and, most importantly, Libya. Libyan discoveries in the late 1950s and 1960s brought floods of new, high-quality oil to market, much controlled by aggressive independents, like Occidental Petroleum, run by flamboyant dealmaker Dr. Armand Hammer. All this new oil created a 20-year surplus. Prices fell, oil became cheap again, cheaper than bottled water. This cheap oil fueled the great 1960s economic boom, but it created deep grievance among producing countries. In 1960, responding to unilateral company price cuts, 5 major exporters, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait, met in Baghdad and formed a new organization, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. For its first decade, OPEC was largely ignored, a powerless talking shop in an oil-flooded world. But its time was coming. The hinge years were the late 1960s and early 1970s. The world was changing. The post-war boom was reaching its peak. Oil demand was soaring. In the United States, the great reserve of spare production capacity, the world's safety net in every previous crisis, was disappearing. The country was becoming a major oil importer for the first time. The 20-year surplus was ending. The world was moving from buyer's market to seller's market. Power was shifting from consuming countries and international companies to producing countries. In 1969, a radical regime led by young, enigmatic Colonel Muammar Gaddafi seized power in Libya. Gaddafi, a Nasser disciple, was determined to get more for his country's oil. He began squeezing companies, demanding higher prices and greater profit shares. He targeted the most vulnerable, independents who, unlike majors, had no other oil sources. One by one, they gave in. A game of leapfrog began, as other producing countries demanded the same terms as Libya, then more. The old 50-50 system was dead. The final act came in October 1973, On Yom Kippur, the holiest Jewish day, Egypt and Syria launched surprise attack on Israel. Amid the war, Arab oil producers, led by Saudi King Faisal, decided to unsheath the They embargoed oil shipments to the United States and other Israel supporters and cut overall production. The world had never experienced anything like it. The effect was immediate and devastating, the first great oil shock. Panic seized the industrial world. Prices quadrupled, from $3 to $12 per barrel. The industrial world plunged into its worst recession since the 1930s. Long lines appeared at gas stations. A new era of energy crisis had begun. OPEC, once dismissed as a paper tiger, was now seen as the world economy's new master. The years that followed were turbulent. Stagflation, a toxic mix of economic stagnation and inflation. The world struggled to adjust to expensive oil reality. There was frantic searching for new supplies outside OPEC in Alaska, Mexico, and the rough North Sea. There was new focus on conservation and energy efficiency. But power seemed firmly with OPEC. Then, at decade's end, came the second oil shock. In 1979, Iran's Shah, America's great Gulf ally, was toppled by popular revolution led by exiled austere cleric Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The Iranian Revolution threw world oil markets into another panic. Iranian production collapsed. Prices doubled, then tripled, soaring over $34 per barrel. The world was again gripped by fear, shortages, and gas lines. The sense of vulnerability in consuming countries was profound. But high prices set powerful forces in motion. The divine laws of supply and demand, as Saudi oil minister Ahmed Zaki Yamani called them, couldn't be defied forever. High prices spurred massive new conservation waves. People bought smaller, fuel-efficient cars. Industries invested heavily in energy-saving technologies. Simultaneously, high prices made producing oil from difficult, expensive new sources profitable. Production from Alaska, the North Sea, and Mexico surged. By early 1980s, the world was awash in oil again. The seemingly all-powerful OPEC faced collapsing markets. It tried defending prices by cutting production, but cheating among members was rampant. Saudi Arabia, as swing producer, was forced to drastically cut its own production to prop up prices, losing market share and revenue. Finally, in 1986, the Saudis had had enough. They opened their taps and flooded the market. Oil prices collapsed, falling from nearly $30 per barrel to below $10. It was the third oil shock, but this time in reverse. The price collapse was disaster for oil-producing countries, but boon for consuming ones, fueling new economic growth. The oil industry was thrown into turmoil. A wave of restructuring, takeovers, and mergers swept through. Oil wars moved from the desert to the New York Stock Exchange floor. Giant companies were bought and sold. As the 20th century drew to a close, a new era seemed to dawn. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union disintegrated. It seemed great ideological and military struggles were over, and the world was entering a new age of globalization, defined by markets and economic competition. And oil, once again, seemed to have become just another commodity. But the story, as we know, is never over. The cycle turns. Iraq's Saddam Hussein's 1990 invasion of Kuwait brought the world to another major crisis's brink, reminding everyone that the Persian Gulf, where two-thirds of the world's oil reserves lie, is an unstable, dangerous place. The world had changed. This time, the international community, led by the United States and in unprecedented partnership with the Soviet Union, stood firm against aggression. This long, incredible story, this epic quest, is testament to powerful, often unseen forces shaping our world. It teaches us that oil is never just business. It's always politics, power, money, and conflict. It's the story of human ingenuity and human folly, of ambition and destiny. And as we stand here today, in a world still utterly dependent on this dark liquid, we can be sure of one thing. the quest for the prize isn't over. The next chapter is being written right now, and it's a story in which we all have a stake. As we draw this story to a close, I find myself thinking about you, a young person, 17 years old, standing on the cusp of your own life's journey. This grand, sprawling history of oil might seem like something from a distant past, a story of old men in faraway lands. But I hope you now see that it's not. It's your story too. The world you've been born into was forged in the heat of these conflicts, shaped by fortunes made and lost, and powered by the very substance we've been discussing. What are the great lessons we can draw from this epic tale? For me, 3 powerful truths stand out. First, oil is not like any other commodity. It's inextricably linked to power. From the moment Churchill decided the British fleet would run on oil, this liquid became a strategic asset, an instrument of national ambition, and a cause of war. Control over oil has meant control over nations, destinies. We saw how Germany and Japan's oil shortages shaped their desperate, destructive World War II strategies. We saw how America's oil abundance fueled Allied victory. And we saw how, in following decades, Middle Eastern nations transformed geological good fortune into immense political and economic power. This is a timeless lesson. Energy security is national security. A nation that doesn't control its own energy sources is vulnerable, subject to others, whims and pressures. Never forget that. The second lesson is about the cyclical nature of things. Oil's history is boom and bust, predicted shortages followed by surprising gluts. Time and again, the world has been gripped by fear of running out, and time and again, human ingenuity, spurred by price, has proven those fears wrong. New technologies are invented, new frontiers opened, new resources found. The price signal is a powerful motivator. When prices are high, it encourages both searching for new supplies and conservation discipline. When prices are low, we tend to become complacent and wasteful, forgetting past lessons. It's a cycle that's repeated itself for 150 years. Understanding this rhythm is crucial. It teaches us to be wary of straight-line projections, to be humble facing uncertainty, and to remember that the market, in its own often painful way, eventually corrects its own imbalances. The third and perhaps most profound lesson is about the relationship between energy and the very fabric of our society. We've become, as Daniel Yergin calls it, hydrocarbon man. Our lives, where we live, how we work, how we travel, what we eat, are all built upon a foundation of abundant and relatively cheap oil. It's given us mobility and a standard of living that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors. But this great gift has come with a cost. We've seen environmental consequences, and we're now grappling with the immense challenge of climate change. Oil's story is a powerful reminder that our energy choices are choices about what kind of world we want to live in. They're not just technical or economic decisions, they're moral and ethical ones. So where does that leave you? It's easy to feel powerless facing such vast historical forces. But you're not. The first step is being informed. Understand this history. Pay attention to where your energy comes from. Read, ask questions, think critically about the energy choices we make as a society. Second, be mindful of your own consumption, small choices you make every day, how you travel, how you use electricity, what you buy, they add up. Conservation isn't about sacrifice, it's about being smart, efficient, and respectful of the resources we have. And finally, be engaged. The next chapter in Energy's story is being written now. It'll be a story of new technologies, solar, wind, biofuels, electric vehicles, and innovations we can't even imagine yet. It'll be a story of great challenges, but also incredible opportunities. Your generation has the chance to write a new, more sustainable, more secure energy future. It's a great responsibility, but also a great adventure. That was a summary of The Prize by Daniel Yergin. We've covered a lot of ground today, but I'll be honest, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic, the deep understanding, happens when you engage with the book yourself. It's in the quiet moments of reading, when a particular story or simple phrase connects with you in unexpected ways. This overview is meant to be a map, helping you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or resonated with that ambitious spirit I know you have, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see the world and your place in it. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next exploration of another life-changing book from the Billionaire's Bookshelf. Your engagement helps us grow this community of curious minds. Let's keep learning and growing together.